Good afternoon from New York. My name is Bob Linden, and I head up educational programs at Filament. Welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Aligning Agency and Client Cultures, Getting Your Professional Relationships Right from the Beginning. The fact is, today's average client-agency relationship expires in less than 3 years. This implies a staggering and very expensive divorce rate for all parties concerned. The critical importance of getting a client-agency relationship right so the team consistently delivers the highest levels of service, effectiveness, and collaborative success should be obvious, but it's clearly never easy. Client turnover in the advertising business is at an all-time high. Today's webinar leaders, Phil Ash and Hayes Roth, will share a step-by-step approach to get agency-client relationships right from the beginning. Before we start, let me briefly review some logistics with you. You can hear us, but we cannot hear you. If you have any problems viewing the presentation on your computer, it could be a firewall or security issue at your end, and you may need to contact your IT person. If you need to contact us via email, please send an email to webclinics@filamentinc.com. We'll help you if you have any technical issues. And if you disconnect for any reason, just go back to the email invitation and log in again. Our webinar leaders today are Phil Ash and Hayes Roth. Phil is a senior partner at Relationship Audits and Management who has directed and consulted on comprehensive client relationship analytics for clients including McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Bank of America, Leo Burnett, Hill Holliday, WPP, and a broad spectrum of global agencies and clients. Prior to his work with Relationship Audits, Phil enjoyed a very successful career at Young & Rubicam. Hayes Roth is a partner at Relationship Audits following an extensive career in advertising and marketing, including client leadership roles at Young & Rubicam and Saatchi & Saatchi. Most recently, he was Chief Marketing Officer at Landor. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a few minutes for questions. However, please feel free to send us your questions as we go through the webinar. We encourage everyone to tweet during this webinar, and our hashtag is Filament Web Clinics. A copy of today's presentation will be sent to all attendees. And with that, please welcome Phil Ash and Hayes Roth.
Thanks, Bob. This is Hayes Roth, and I'm delighted to be here with my partner, Phil Ash, to talk to you on this very important subject. We are going to cover about 45 minutes worth of what we think is fairly meaty content, and we're going to take you through, to begin with, our requisite little very brief update on who Relationship Audits and Management is, affectionately known as RAM. But then we're going to get right into what's so hard about doing the understanding culture on the both sides of the aisle, from agencies and clients, identifying the key characteristics that each of these has and how to know what a culture is at a different organization and what kinds there might be. How do you embrace the different client agency cultures themselves and get them to work to the mutual benefit of all involved? What constitutes real dialogue between client and agency? How do you create an openness and trust between the two through a strong relationship? What are the priority steps that you need to do this? And then what are the positive differences this can actually make to your business? So I will do the paid commercial announcement, just a couple slides about who we are. Relationship Audits and Management is been around for over 20 years. It's a leading specialist in the measurement of agency-client relationships. And that means identifying the opportunities to maximize the greater value from each entity through better understanding of what each of these organizations and the relationship has to offer. And we work globally for agencies and clients and associations alike. We do client relationship auditing and listening programs, supplier relationship reviews, win, loss, and pitch reviews, internal stakeholder relationships. We also do evaluations of internal agency at corporations, and then relationship diligence and client referencing and training and consultancy. We've been doing this for a long time, and we do a lot of them, over 30,000 assessments this past year alone. And we work with some of the world's leading client organizations, as you will see here. and we also work with many of the world's leading agencies and their conglomerates. So we're fairly comfortable that the information we're going to share with you is based on all of that work and our years of experience in the business. And with that, we'll get right down to business, and I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Thank you, Hayes. So let's get right into the topic, aligning client and agency cultures. And let's begin by talking about why you must master this.
Hello?
It should not be a surprise to anyone on this webinar today that maintaining agency-client relationships has become exponentially more difficult. Just look at these numbers and then consider that 2/3 of client agency divorces are said to be about relationship and service issues. Most people can easily identify the impact on the agency: lost revenue, difficult people decisions, real estate issues. But I question how many clients think through the opportunity cost, the time invested by key people in selecting a new agency, the fees for agency search firms, the time invested in getting a new agency up to speed, the loss of institutional knowledge, perhaps by people who've worked on the business for many years, and the disruption to marketing efforts. So let's discuss what we mean by corporate culture. If you go to Google or Amazon, you'll see there are enough books written on the subject to fill libraries, mostly rather academic and good reading. But when you join a company, the corporate culture can often feel more like a shark tank. So what do we mean by corporate culture? It refers to the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. Understanding your own company's culture and how to work with others is an essential component to success. So let's look at 5 questions to get at the essence of what corporate culture is. What 10 words would you use to describe either your company or a company you work with? At that company, what's important? Who gets promoted? What behaviors are rewarded? Who fits in and who doesn't? It's worth dwelling on this for a moment. And I ask you to think about, do you and your people really understand this for each client or agency you work with? Now let me hand it back to Hayes.
Thanks, Phil. So culture is actually a two-way street. And while we know that agencies are primarily responsible for understanding their clients' culture, as they are in the service business, it really takes two to make it work, as is implied by this cartoon. And we also know that power is moving from the professional services firm to the client steadily, and that's almost universal. They must increasingly demonstrate a willingness to be cooperative and responsive, to adapt to confidence in today's clients. And whether logical or illogical, the most sophisticated client focuses more on quality of service versus quality of work. And that's borne out by the facts. 90% of all referrals are driven by service, not the technical quality of the work delivered. So it does matter how you do what you do and how you understand your clients. And moreover, it's naive to think that your client is going to tailor itself, himself, herself, to your culture as an agency. So growing your business with the client really demands careful attention here. You have to make an emotional connection with them, which is what culture is really all about. Clients reward assignments to agencies who they want to work with, almost irrespective of the content that's pitched. Failing to make a real connection with your client results in failure, literally. So your objective as an agency is to make your clients so happy and confident in your service that they think of you as an extension of their own team. And we know this from countless interviews with clients who tell us over and over again, their ultimate goal is to have the agency looked at as a partner, a true partner. But this is management's responsibility at the agency. This is not something that just happens. We all know the facts, and we all can assume intuitively that good service is critically important. But performance of that service is really the challenge. And how do you institute that on a consistent, comprehensive basis? Well, one way to do that is to make sure you check with your agency, your clients, as to whether or not you're living up to what you promise. As we like to say, you can't expect what you don't inspect. So regular client agency surveys or interviews or meetings to just talk about the relationship and how you are doing, and whether not beyond just project development processes, but whether or not you're meeting full expectations are critically important. You need to understand, make sure you know that the client expectations are being met and that are fully understood across the board. Agency has to be heard as well. Their concerns need to be registered. Goals have to be mutually understood. If there are issues, they should be addressed immediately. And the good side of this, the upside, is that opportunity areas also come out of these kinds of dialogue. So we recommend every 6 months or at least a year that there are times set aside, and either doing them with formal surveys or some sort of format that allows you to have candid conversations between client and agency to ensure that all these expectations and opportunities are being understood. For the client, your goal is to get the best work out of your agency, and ultimately you're responsible for the ROI that they return on your marketing budget. Marketing managers, as you know, are evaluated by the perceived effectiveness of the work that gets driven through the agencies. So it's critical that the agency understands how you evaluate that work. What's the client's criteria for success? And an unhappy agency relationship hardly ever results in great outcomes. While the agency has to take responsibility for its performance and has to do the heavy lifting on understanding the client culture, the client can also help by doing the kinds of evaluations that we just discussed, and also doing daily and weekly coaching, client culture, values, style, making sure that the agency understands it, making sure the agency understands management expectations, and that process is met. And as you'll learn, all different agencies and clients have different processes, and if you've worked at different ones yourselves, you know this too. So these need to be understood in the specific relationship that's been established between client X and the agency that serves them. And a part of that is the decision-making process. How is it done? Who makes the decisions? And there are many variations on this we'll be covering. And clients can learn from agencies too. You hired them because you liked how they thought and presented themselves. There was something about them that made you want to bring them into the fold. These kinds of, how they think and how they act and what they do is a direct reflection of their own culture. So learn what motivates and excites your agency team. How can you channel this to work best for you? What work are you is the agency proudest of? And what other clients do they work with? And what do you know about them? And what do you know about the work they do? The goal is, how can you excite your team to push beyond what they are expected to do because they want to? Phil, up to you.
Okay. Well, this cartoon look familiar to anyone? It sure looks like more than a few meetings I have attended. What's depicted here are a lot of different agendas. So this hardly looks like a team ready to produce great marketing communications. Now, as you think about client culture, we often find it useful to start by looking at the core competency or the driving force in the organization. By that, I mean what characteristic probably accounted for the success of the company. Examples. At Apple, is it innovation? At BMW, is it engineering? At IBM, is it sales? And what would you say it is at Amazon today? So thinking through that helps you think about, is there a type of person who typifies mid-management or senior management? And for an agency, this will undoubtedly influence the way in which you need to do business with a given client. The culture may be shaped by the founder or the leader. Think of Thomas Watson and his approach at IBM compared to Steve Jobs at Apple. I remember the stark contrast between working on the Chrysler Motor business in Detroit and then coming to work in New York on the Kraft General Foods business. And I'm not talking about the difference in the cities. So understanding and complementing the way a client organization considers and makes decisions is critical to an agency's success. And it's just as important for a client to understand the agency you're working with. Let's start with, why did you or your predecessor hire them? What are their core strengths? Are they outstanding for a particular capability, or do they have good all-round skills? How does your company, as a client, fit in with the other clients on their roster? The point here is, do they seem to be a good fit? Do you have an agreeable and very productive working relationship with the agency? Here are some more things for the client team to fully understand. These will inform you regarding how the agency want to work with you, how to make things happen at the agency, what you should expect in terms of continuity and staff turnover. For example, if they have a assignment rotation policy, as used to be the case at many large agencies, you shouldn't be surprised that the assistant account executives are moving every 6 months. But perhaps the management supervisor stays on the business for at least 5 years. It's not that one thing is right or wrong, it's just that it's really important that you understand how the agency works and how to get the best out of it. So now let me turn it back to Hayes.
So, just as the agency has to learn, or as the client has to learn how to deal with a new agency, so obviously does the agency have to know how to deal with an agency, and the expectations are always extremely high. What should you do as a new client as you take on a new agency? And this is something that many of you have undoubtedly experienced as you've gone through pitches and everybody is focused on winning the business and understanding what the client is looking for exactly. And the win happens and everybody's ecstatic. You know, there are cocktails all around, champagne is broken, and now you got to get down and really figure out how it is that we're going to work together on a productive basis, because a pitch is showtime, but the rest of the time after that is roll up your sleeves time. So agencies really need to look at, rather clients really need to look at how they treat their agencies. And the first and best way to do that is as a strategic partner, as an extension of your marketing department, as we referenced earlier. If you're put into the vendor camp, you end up thinking like a vendor, and that means you don't go the extra mile. You're just there to supply work. So give the agency access and time. Ensure that they're informed, that they're prepared, and that they're set up for success. Make sure they understand the company culture and decision-making approach. Make sure you communicate your goals and needs on a regular and consistent basis so that they are clear about it. Answer questions, obviously, and let them immerse themselves in your business. As we've talked about in previous webinars, the more the agency knows about the client's business, the better they are able to serve. And another important tip here is to make sure you share with your agency colleagues how you are compensated, how you and your partners within the firm are compensated in terms of success, so that the agency knows what your own motivations are. And that can be on a personal basis and on a corporate basis alike. Make sure you value intelligent risk-taking. Agencies were brought in, you hire them to challenge you, to bring new ideas, fresh ideas to your business. Now, they can't be reckless, so there is a fine line. But you should be open-minded and listen to them and avoid making judgment on an idea until you had time to think about it. You can always say no later, but give it the sleep test. Agencies talk amongst themselves about clients who tend to be fairly negative and always want to retreat back to the safe and sure. That shouldn't be what you've asked your agency to do. And when the work is done and you and your agency team agree about it and it's time to move up the ladder and sell it to your management or to your board or to whatever your ultimate audience is going to be, make sure you stand with them and champion them. This can't be it's my success if it works and their problem if it doesn't. Make certain that those who ultimately are going to approve the work know what the brief is. All too often we've seen circumstances where the team goes forward and the client, the senior client, takes a look at the work and says, well, that's not the direction I was thinking of at all. Agencies and clients with great strong culture in this area make sure that that's done very rigorously before any copy or new idea is presented in any way. And by the same token, make sure your agency understands the processes and the guide rails that make the process stay on track. Every client has them, and every agency needs to make sure that they're complicit with it. And another idea that we have found works very, very well is tell your new agency at the outset that you want to have, or agree with your client that you want to have a 100-day review. That means after the first 100 days, and everybody's had 3 months of work together, let's now sit down and do a formal review and find out whether we are on track. Now, as an agency, you have a twofold objective: to absorb as much information as possible with your new company service, and to do it as quickly as possible. To have a clear understanding of the personalities and culture of your new clients. We've been talking about this. Start with the obvious. There's always a kickoff meeting. But data sharing and parameter setting are critical to making sure that everybody is on the same page. And then discuss with your client whether they have an onboarding process. Do they have a set way of getting agencies on board? If they're a large client, they probably do. Smaller clients may not. They may not be changing agencies that often, or they may only have a very limited roster. If they don't have one, it's an opportunity for you to help them create one or use one that you've employed in the past. Also, tap into your network to find people who have had personal experience with the client that you're going to be dealing with. There are a lot of ways to do this. There are ways to do it online. There are ways to do it with contacts that you may have in other fields. But again, you want to know who you're dealing with and what their motivations are. Don't be assumptive and fail to validate your perceptions. One-on-one management interviews at the beginning of the relationship are a great tool. It's something that we often did, and we automatically do, frankly, in the branding business. Once you got a project going, you set up one-on-one interviews to make sure the clients are able to register with you what their vision is for the new relationship and the business that's to come out of it and the work, and also allow the agency to have a one-on-one intimacy. And that would be a commensurate agency person with the appropriate client, most likely, and sometimes it can be two-on-one or a small group. But the important thing is that there is a candid conversation that allows you to make sure that you see each other's side of the opportunity and that you're aware of any challenges along the way. One thing we often employed when I was working at Landor was a win assessment report. If we won the client after we got through plotting ourselves, we thought maybe it would be pretty smart to have somebody, and we would hire a third party, in this case it was RAM, to actually talk to one or two of those clients and ask some basic questions about why did you hire the firm? Why did you hire Landor? And these brought out very interesting observations, because it isn't just because, well, we like them, but you'll start to get into some detail, and it can be very candid, and it'll give you a clear perception of what the client's understanding of the agency's strengths and weaknesses are as well. And the best part about it was it gives you a true blueprint for success. It'll give you a clear understanding of what their expectations are, where they see some potential risk, and what they would suggest you do to get going forward. It's a wonderful way to start a relationship with everybody clear on what has to be done. Here's a way not to do it. Once you get in the door, immediately offering to do all kinds of other services is a dead stop. Clients hired you for a specific reason. If you've listened to them or done your post-win interviews or however you choose to get at the information, you'll know exactly what they expect of you. And that's what they're expecting to see. Down the road, if you deliver on those well, you have every opportunity to come back and start talking about other projects that you could work with them or other services you could provide. But it's not something to do at the beginning. And back to this 100 days survey idea. It's intended to make sure that you're on track. We believe, should be a formal performance and relationship assessment 3 months in, finding out what's working well, any negatives or areas that need to be improved, identify or confirm each client's goals, make sure that those have not changed over the next for the next 12 months or so. Look at the resource capabilities. Has the agency put the right people on the team? Are the clients being accessible? Are they getting what they expected to have delivered? And there should be an opportunity here for the agency to chime in and say, here's ways that maybe the client could improve the working relationship. And if there's any misalignment along the way, then you have a clear blueprint, as I said, to improve performance and working relationships. It's essentially an early warning of major issues and can be a great time saver and even a business saver.
All right, so let's shift gears here a little. You've been working with the agency for some time, and now there is a significant change in your organization. So as the client, what should you do? It's important that you meet with the agency leadership and explain as transparently as possible what's occurred and how it's going to affect your company and them. Have marketing and sales goals changed? Are the client expectations now different? Are there changes to the briefing or approval process? Are there new clients? Are there going to be different relationships? And how might the agency's business, organization, and staffing be impacted? If there are new or different executives who may interact with the agency, it's important that they meet the agency leadership as soon as possible. It's important that the senior clients, if they've changed, understand what the agency is doing, what they have been doing in the past, and what they are currently expected to achieve, and what's the impact on the business. And if appropriate, the agency can often help the new executives learn about the brand history, the category, customer insights, competitive marketing communications activity, and so forth. So there's an opportunity here for the agency to really help the new client people. So if there's a change at the agency, it's important that both the agency and client take action. First, it's critical that the agency get in front of this and that the client hears the news first from the agency and not from some hallway rumor, or worse still, social media or a news feed or a reporter calling for a comment. Next, if there is new leadership at the agency, it's in the client's best interest to meet as soon as possible with those people to ensure that the agency leadership hears firsthand what they need to know, what will be important to their success with your organization, and very importantly, the agency people that you and your team value. If it's a change in the agency team, then the client should meet with the agency leadership to determine what the agency is doing to onboard the new team members and what the client team can do to help. Now let's talk about how agency and client should work together to build and maintain mutual respect and success. I feel sorry for Rex and Rusty at this meeting because their approach and style is obviously not a good fit with the client culture at this corporation. The goal of any professional services firm and its key people should be to become trusted advisors. But only a small number really achieve true trusted advisor status. These general guidelines should not be a surprise to any agency professional, right? Of course, you want to make a tangible difference to the client's business. Of course, you want to stay up to date with the client's business, their industry, their category. Of course, you want to join them in off-site meetings and field trips, etc. And of course, you stay in touch with them regularly and very productively. Now, much of this is just plain common sense. As Hayes said earlier, it's the consistency of execution that makes the difference. And by the way, I highly recommend a relatively small book to read. It's by David Meister. It's an enduring book called The Trusted Advisor. Now, as we look at countless agency performance assessments that we've done, here are selected verbatim that we see in the client responses regarding agency performance. It's hard to say which one is worse than another, but I'll pick the first and last. The agency is only interested in selling us stuff, not solving our problems. We never hear from agency leadership except for a referral request. Let me ask you, what do you think is the most egregious on this list? Any one of these is a serious issue that needs remedial action and a change of approach. If 2 or 3 of these are systemic at a client, you'll be lucky to retain the business, and you almost certainly will not be invited for additional work. If you're the client, you also have a responsibility to help build conversation, openness, and trust. So let's start with some basics of what the client should do. You should provide the agency with clear, well-grounded direction that has been signed off by whomever will finally approve the work. This is absolutely essential, that whoever is finally approving the work has seen and agreed the brief. Be as transparent with the agency as possible and provide them with all appropriate information. Now, as a side note here, the SEC, Safe Harbor, and Sarbanes-Oxley regulations may require legal approval, and some people at the agency may need to sign a client-provided NDA. But that's fine. You just want them as informed as possible. And then ensure they get credit where it's due. As Hayes said, treat the agency as an extension of your marketing team. Hopefully, the client culture and team do not exhibit any of these characteristics that undermine morale and motivation at the agency. Again, let's pause for a moment, and I ask you to consider whether any of these exist in one of your client-agency relationships. If so, what will you do about it next week to try to change the behavior? So in sum, we've covered a lot of ground. We've outlined how maintaining client-agency relationships has become more challenging. We discussed why understanding culture should matter to both agencies and clients, and why both must master this to enjoy success. We outlined some very specific things you should do as a new client or a new agency, and talked about what you should do when there is a significant change at either. And last but not least, we talked about developing dialogue, openness, and trust, and some specific actions that the agency and client can do to help. And now let me hand it over to Hayes to close with why we're doing this. What is the benefit of all this?
Well, hopefully a lot of that has been pretty apparent in the conversation we've just had. But for clients, there's a great deal to be gained. And this is perhaps not immediately obvious to a number of clients, but if they think about it, and I'm going to go through these, they will see that there is little monetary benefit to doing this as well as emotional benefit. If you do all the steps that we have advised, you become the client of choice at the agency. And you've probably worked at agencies or worked with agencies where there was a standard bearer account that everybody knew and respected, that they were known for. And that kind of an account attracts the agency's best talent, not because they're forced to work on it, but because they want to work on it. And you want to be that account, the account that everybody wants to work on because they know that they are respected, that they're going to get their work a proper hearing, and that it'll see the light of day with any kind of luck. And because of that, there is a core sustained team who deeply understand the client. We said earlier, one of the key challenges in our industry these days is turnover, and finding people who really want to stay and work on a given client with a different agency, or with a given agency, excuse me. And that's because when they understand, an agency representative understands the culture and how to succeed together with the client, everybody wins, and they tend to stick around. Your work becomes the clear priority at the agency. It's celebrated, it's actively promoted. Senior leadership is focused on it, and the quality of the output is consistently strong and good. And the processes are institutionalized. Any of you who have worked with Procter & Gamble know that, and companies like them know that there is a very clear process that both the creative work has to go through to get finally approved, but also as mundane and simplistic as the billing, which sometimes isn't so simplistic. Invoicing and billing become a very clearly understood process. Approvals are understood, and everyone's clear about how the work gets done. Perhaps most importantly, your agency team will go the extra mile. They understand and embrace your organization thoroughly. After all, as I just said, they want to work with you. They like the business that you're in, and they know how they're treated, and they know it's appreciated. And they'll go to exceptional lengths to delight and surprise you. And that is the ultimate reward for both client and agency, that the work exceeds expectations consistently. And I hope you've had the opportunity to work on accounts like that. I have, and I know Phil has. And when it works, it is a wonderful experience, and everybody benefits. For the agency, perhaps a little more obvious. Great work and happy clients lead to additional assignments, and therefore more money. And this can be within the current account. There could be greater assignments that come along there, or it could be referral to another division or product line, or even another company. And it's important to remember that your relationship with the client is something that can often sustain changes in employment. Many times, I know in my life and in Phil's life, we've had clients who've moved on to other assignments at other companies, but because of the relationship and the understanding that was developed in our previous work, we were able to pick up new business in another company. And it's a very important aspect of how you develop leads. There's less fee sensitivity when you get the cultural perspective right. In the end, as we've tried to express, agencies are rated based on the perceived value of what they contribute to the client. If the work is stellar and delivers or exceeds expectations, there's less discussion about price. It doesn't go away, but if there's value perceived, smart clients are willing to pay the premium. There are greater efficiencies. If you're clear about the client culture, you know how to get stuff through the pipeline. And that includes, as I just said, both the work and sometimes the invoices. Attracting and retaining talent. Agencies that have a great reputation for work on a certain client or a couple of clients tend to attract the best talent. People want to work on those places, and they want to work with those agencies. And then successful client relationships attract notice, and they therefore attract talent. And it'll also help you screen better for the people that you bring in, because you understand the culture of the client. You will know how to ask the right questions of new talent so that they too will be the right people to fit in and understand how to work with this particular client. It's really important, and it saves a lot of wasted time and effort. So in a sentence, your relationship with the client is frankly worth more than the product or service being sold to the client. But don't take our word for it. One of the great leaders in our business, Lou Gerstner, said, culture isn't one aspect of the game, it is the game. And with that, we thank you for your attention and time and invite you to give us some questions or comments if you have them.
And Hayes, we are getting a lot of questions that came in 22 minutes ago. So I'm glad we left time at the end for the Q&A. Phil, I think you had, and by the way, we had a lot of people signing in late. So just a heads up, we will be sending everyone the presentation afterwards. Let's see. What's a good example of powerful corporate cultures, in your opinion?
Phil, why don't you start?
I think in no particular order, there's a very strong corporate culture at IBM. They've softened a little. It's no longer a total requirement that you wear a blue shirt or a white shirt, but they have a very powerful corporate culture. I think Zappos is a really, really good example. Hayes, you were talking about one the other day.
Well, yes, and actually there's a wonderful PR firm called Peppercom, a very successful mid-sized firm, who has a very deep culture, and they've been around for 25 years, something like that. And they actually put their people, and if you work at Peppercom, you have to go through a stand-up comedy training program with them, which sounds a little funny and a little scary probably for some, but the whole point of it is to make sure that it teaches them some fundamentals about listening and reading an audience and being able to stand on your feet and think fast and present well. And it also adds a certain lightness to the atmosphere there. And if you talk to any of their clients, they're aware of this. It's not something that they flog heavily, but it comes through in everything they do. And it makes them the kind of agency that their clients want to work with. So it's a really wonderful thing to see and hear about.
And Hayes, that is such a great takeaway. Doing comedy, or let me ask you this: any agencies that you know of that might put new hires through improv classes?
I don't know many that have done any of this, but that's essentially what Peppercam does.
Okay.
Part of the comedy thing is improv.
Okay.
And that is the perfect training ground for the left field questions that we often get in our business.
Wow, great idea. Great idea. You mentioned IBM. You did mention the PR firm, Zappos. What about agencies? Any agencies come to mind with powerful cultures?
Well, I think historically, we can think of agencies that had a renowned culture. Ogilvy, for example, Young and Rubicam had a very, very strong culture. Gray had a strong culture. And usually that's driven from the top down, perhaps by a founder like Bill Bernbach. But, at the good agencies, at the successful agencies, regardless of size, they find a way to transfer that from one leader to another. And I think that's the essence. I understand today, for example, there's a very strong culture at RGA, a very successful digital agency.
I'm not surprised because, as you said, it's from the top down. And knowing Bob Greenberg, that doesn't surprise me.
He doesn't. So,
what's really critical is that, regardless of the size of the professional services firm, as leadership retires or moves on for one reason or another, that in fact, it is turned over and it's established.
Okay. As the questions continue to come in, what have you found helpful to encourage the desired behavior on the part of the client?
Well, I'll start with that. We're obviously in the business of helping make that happen, Phil and I. And we know that unless you have a forum for honest dialogue, it's very tough. So that's why we prescribe either a formalized process like the one we offer with relationship audits and management, or many companies have this on their own, but you have to have a periodic and consistently comprehensive dialogue arrangement where you're not just talking about a particular project or complaining about some job not getting done, but where you sit down and talk about the relationship. We say you should do it if it's a relationship of any kind of size and consequence. You should do it every 6 months. Some do it over cocktails. We would recommend that you do it with a formalized survey. It doesn't have to be, painful. It can be done fairly quickly, but it should be on a regular basis. Some do it once a year. And it's one of those things that agencies tend to get maybe a little lazy about, maybe because they don't want to hear what gets said, or because they're too busy getting the work done to stop and pause for a minute and try to make sure that they are on track with what the client's expectations are and perceptions, whether perceptions are good or bad.
And just to build on what Hayes is saying, it's very important that there's a representative sample. So if you're the client in charge of the agency relationship, it's important that you talk to a representative sample of the people inside of the organization to understand, are the senior management pleased with the output of the agency? Are the day-to-day people happy working with the relationship? Unfortunately, we see all too often that one group is pleased and the other group is not having a good time. And so it's important that you talk to a representative sample.
Okay, question. Your suggestions about what clients should do after a change in the agency and other activities are good, but clients often do not take the initiative to do them. What can the agency do to help make these activities actually happen?
Phil?
I'll take a lead on that. What I see at some of the best client organizations is a willingness to talk to the agency if only they can get an invitation. So I would turn around to the agency people and say, when was the last time you invited a client to come and talk to the agency, to talk about their business, to talk about what matters to them, to talk about how they see the future? Most clients will respond very well to the invitation.
Okay. Hayes, any thoughts?
No, I think that's perfectly correct. And we've often talked about back in early days in advertising, when I worked on the General Mills account at Campbell Methune, we would have a day every year that was spent where we would have the client come in and we would together talk through the business, not just their products, but the entire business. We even put up grocery shelves in the conference room with all the different cereal products that we were interested in. And then the afternoon was spent talking about a new idea that maybe the agency brought to the client that may or may not have had anything to do with selling work for the agency, but it was really a way to think of something differently in the category or outside the category that might spawn ideas. These things take time and planning, and they take time out of the day-to-day getting things done, but they are really valued by clients because it gives them a chance to blue sky in a controlled environment and also develop bonding opportunities, i.e. cultural relationship building at the same time.
Okay, so which segues regarding cultural bonding. Let's segue into the next question. Do you think the cultural disconnect between agencies and clients has worsened in recent years? And if so, why?
Oh, man. Well, I think, yeah, sad to say, I think it has, and it goes back to some things that we've said in some of our other webinars, but it always comes back, in my mind anyway, to training. And I hear over and over again in our industry how training has really, which once became a critical part of, certainly when Phil and I were growing up in the business, there was, whether it was Y&R or any of the other agencies you work for, there was a concerted effort to make sure that you understood how the right way to do things according to that agency, which is what? That's culture building. And I fear that there's, just because we're so squeezed for time and margins and the pressures of success, that a lot of that has fallen apart. So I do believe that maybe there is less sensitivity. That's why I think these webinars are important. I hope that to people who are listening, and that they spend some time thinking about how important it is to go beyond just getting the work done. That's a given. But to get to know and to have personal connections with the people you work with, so that you understand what motivates them and they understand what motivates you.
Yeah, to build on that, as I said earlier in the presentation, your goal should be, as an agency person or any professional services person, your goal should be to become a trusted advisor, not just someone who transacts business and gets projects done. And if you think about the term trusted advisor, there are two words there. There's the quality of the advice and whether or not the client has confidence in you and your organization. I would say strongly that if you can become a trusted advisor, you're going to have a great relationship and your company will really thrive.
Okay, here's a question, a good question, combining new business and culture. In a pitch situation where you don't really know the prospect and they don't know you, how do you best assess culture prior to presenting to them?
I'll jump on that just because I've been in a lot of those situations. It's hard. We mentioned in the presentation finding people who know the client, and that's possible to do. In some ways, it should be easier to some extent, because you should never walk into a meeting without knowing everything you can about the people in the room. And courtesy of LinkedIn or Facebook or any of the other digital assets that we now have at our fingertips, there's really no excuse not to know something about the people that you're going to meet, where they went to school. So in many cases you can learn about hobbies and things like that. It doesn't tell you culture so much, but it certainly tells you the kind of people that you're going to be meeting, and that has certainly should be a good indicator of what kind of people are in that company. Then there are things like Glassdoor you can look at to see what, sometimes that can be a little negative, but at least you can see what candid reviews are of the company and the work environment there. And then, of course, just reading the press clippings out there. Becomes a mosaic, really, as you try to put pieces together of different bits of information before you walk in the room. But it really is possible to have a good sense of them. And the other thing is, when you walk in the room, instead of just starting to talk, I often advocate asking some questions and getting what I call room tone, so that you can hear how they talk and the kind of language they use, and if they interact together, what that sounds like. Is it collaborative sounding, or does everybody have a different opinion? Or are they, stone silent and you're there to perform? That'll tell you a lot right there as to what kind of operation you're walking into.
Okay, let's see, more questions. What's a good example of a very long-running relationship based on aligned culture and, of course, performance? So good examples of very long agency-client relationships based on culture.
Well, I think we can think of a few immediately that come to mind. BBDO has been working with General Electric for nearly 100 years. I think Ogilvy has been working with American Express for at least 50 years.
Until the other day.
Yeah, that was a shocker, yeah.
Absolutely. But, that's an example. I think they, in general, Procter & Gamble is historically renowned for long-running relationships, a philosophy of the assets go home in the elevator. So if you're not happy with something that's going on or the performance, it's a people issue. You don't have to throw everything out. So I think you can all think of an example in your world of a long-running relationship.
They're just harder to come by these days. There are fewer of them, I think.
I think they're harder to maintain.
Yeah.
You think it's because the client CMO wants to make change, since the CMO was in effect putting their career on the line? Change is better?
I just think in general, as an outcome of the way Wall Street looks at business, there's not much forgiveness for missing targets or underperforming for several quarters in a row. So I don't think these days there's much time allowed for things to get better. And so people feel they must take action. But whether the action is actually going to produce the desired result is a whole different question.
Right.
But they feel they have to do something.
Okay. Question: is corporate or agency culture something that just happens to firms, or does one create it?
Well, as Phil said earlier on, it usually starts at the top, right? And if an agency is starting itself up, usually they split off from somewhere else, or somebody had a vision for doing something different. But what happens is, as time goes on, there are two things can happen. One, either the culture can get calcified, because you can't, the culture of an agency in the 1990s or even the 1980s has to evolve. If it's still the same as what it was then and hasn't changed, then that's probably a failing firm. There has to be a thread throughout. And that comes with time and with the kind of people that you look for. And agencies that have, and clients too, like a P&G, has a very strong credo for what they're about, what their purpose is. They also take a look at it regularly to make sure that it's still relevant. But at the heart of those companies, I believe that they began with they have a founder story. I know with Landor, every year on July 9th, the whole company around the world celebrates Walter Landor's birthday. Just kind of a silly thing, and they do it by going off and doing good works, some kind of volunteer action that the offices will do in their parts of the world, one of which led to the design of the 9/11 Memorial brand, by the way, and then they have some fun. But it always reminds them of where they came from, what the founders' ideals were, and it's a great way to celebrate that and make a point.
And if you want a really good example that's outside of marketing services, look at the website for a law firm called Quinn Emanuel. It's very strong in terms of its culture.
Phil, can you repeat that? You said Quinn, is that Quinn, Emanuel, Emanuel? Correct. Okay.
Two words.
They're a big worldwide firm of litigators. And, they work on things like the BP oil spill.
Okay.
But when you go to their homepage, it's fascinating how clear their culture is.
And how distinctive they are from every other law firm.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question as I'm looking at the clock. And Phil, I think you might have answered this early in the webinar. Are there any particular authors or books that is helpful on the subject of aligning culture?
Yes, David Meister comes to mind.
Okay.
He's written a series of books about managing the professional services firm. And that's where I would start. And in particular, there's one relatively small book. You could read it in a night if you wanted to. It's called The Trusted Advisor.
The Trusted Advisor. And David spells his last name. I believe it's Maister.
Correct.
Okay. And with that, it is 2 o'clock. Just a heads up to people online that you'll be getting a survey at 2:15 today from SurveyMonkey. If you would fill it out and return it, it would be greatly appreciated. Phil Hayes, thank you. Some great insights here. As we know in the past, I'm probably the only one tweeting on on Twitter, but that's okay. I would urge everyone to check the Filament website. 3 more webinars in July. We just added one in August on online media buying. And with that, my thanks to Hayes, my thanks to Phil. We thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you soon on another Filament webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks.